It's now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Chuck Underwood. Chuck Underwood is the founder and president of the Ohio-based consulting firm, The Generational Imperative. He's been studying generational dynamics for 25 years and is one of the pioneering scholars in this field. He provides consulting, research, and training to corporations and organizations on generational marketing and media strategy and generational workforce strategy. He's also a former reporter, anchor, producer, and sports play-by-play announcer in both television and radio. PBS has just announced that it's funding the production of a national television series that Chuck will host. It's called America's Generations with Chuck Underwood, and the first 3 shows will be taped in a few weeks. His book on generational business strategies is called The Generational Imperative. He's presented generational strategy to our country's business-to-business media and to Canadian audiences in other industries such as healthcare and financial services. And in the U.S., his clients include a few mom-and-pop operations like Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, and Hewlett-Packard, and many others. Please join me in welcoming Chuck Underwood.
Good morning. Terry, thank you very much. And how fun to learn about your personal story and triumph in believing in your product and battling from bottom to top and now being at the top and living the dream. Congratulations. And to Karen, my sincere thanks to you and your team at OMDC for the opportunity, and also to the folks at Magazines Canada, with whom I had the pleasure to work a few months back and who I believe helped to open the door to this opportunity. This is an interesting opening keynote because it has so little to do with digital. So I won't acknowledge and mention the specific names of the people who recommended me because 50 minutes from now they might be in big trouble with you folks. But it is a pleasure to join the creative class and the entrepreneurial class of this province and to share with you very, very briefly this field of study that was just tinkered with in the 1960s and 70s, but it was then in the 1980s that about 3 or 4 of us blindly stumbled onto it, thinking somehow that that word generation meant more than we probably expected. We didn't know each other at the time, and we conducted our own separate research, and we starved with the idea through the 80s and through the 90s until right around the turn of the century, a couple of major advertisers tried generationally created and generationally strategized advertising. And lo and behold, it worked. And so in the past 10 years, generational study and its business applications have skyrocketed. And thankfully, it has quickly proven itself and is sending out the message that this is imperative training and imperative strategy for all of us in business, and especially in 2 major pillars of daily business life. One is the workplace, using generational strategy in order to recruit the best employees from each generation, onboard them smoothly in those critical first few days and weeks, manage them effectively, inspire them, engage them, and most importantly, retain them. And in film and television and music, generational dynamics, just understanding the stories of the 5 living generations in our 2 countries, can inspire ideas for either a 90-second news piece or a 90-minute feature film, as well as the creative way in which you shoot and edit them. And with these new story ideas can also come generationally influenced scripts, and in music, lyrics, and the music itself. The good news about this field of study is that it is really, really easy to understand. The entire premise of generational dynamics is based upon 3 now heavily researched and universally embraced truths. Truth number 1, between the time that each of us is born and the time that we leave the full-time classroom and get fully into adulthood, usually in our early 20s, in that formative years window of our lives, you and I are going to mold most of the core values and the core beliefs that we will keep for life. Yes, we'll change, yes, we'll evolve, but those core values will remain largely intact, and they will be molded based upon the times that we experience as we come of age and the teachings that we absorb from older generations of parents, educators, religious leaders, and others. And any time in Canadian life there is a significant change and a widespread change in either the times or the teachings that young kids are going to absorb as they come of age, a new generation begins. Truth number two, and this is why the topic thankfully is so white-hot now, life in Canada, life in the States, has changed so often in the last century, and when it has changed, it seems to have changed so sharply into new directions. And thanks to modern medicine, we are now living on average 30 years longer in 2012 than we did in 1912, that our life expectancy now has room for 5 living generations, each of whose formative years were a little different from the other 4, and so each of whose core values are a little different from the other 4. And truth number 3 is what brings generational dynamics right down to the brutal bottom line of day-to-day business. Those unique core values that each generation molds during its unique formative years are now going to exert astonishing influence over that generation's career choices, consumer decisions, lifestyle preferences, and personal relationships. Here is the starting point of generational study. Say hello to Canada's and the States' 5 living generations. The GI generation, born between the years 1901 and 1926, current age in 2012, 86 and older. Of those who are still with us, their unique formative years began in very early childhood during the economic prosperity of the roaring 1920s, but were then followed by 16 years that to most of us in this room are unimaginable. The complete misery and hopelessness of the Great Depression, followed by the unimaginable horror of World War II. Those unique times, when coupled with the teachings that young GI kids were absorbing as they were coming of age, would mold in them a very unique list of core values that to this day guide their consumer choices and, yep, even in some instances, career decisions. This is the generation that has been described as the one that saved the world. And trying to follow their act is the silent generation. Born from 1927 to 1945, current age of the silents is 67 to 85. At the request of your conference planners, we'll give a brief portrait of this generation in about 60 seconds. The baby boomers, that post-World War II population bulge that has been delicately described as the rat moving through the snake. Born from 1946 to 1964, the generation whose motto once was never trust anyone over 30 would now like to revise that. Current age of the boomers, 48 to 66. When in the world did that happen? Generation X, mysterious, bewildering, so different from all of our other generations, truly an island generation in so many ways, a childhood far different from all others. Born from 1965 to 1981, Xers this year are aged 31 to 47. And Canada's next great generation, the millennials, do not call us Generation Y. Do not call us echo boomers. The oldest half of our generation, current age 18 to 30, has come of age with boomer parents. And like them, we're cocky, we're sassy, we think we're going to change the world for the better, so we probably will. Born from 1982 to 1994, the millennials are still coming. Generational study is not trustworthy, and it is not accurate until we reach about the age of 18. And at that point, legitimate generational study begins. As soon as we see a significant change in the core values of 18-year-olds who are pouring out of the school system, we will be able to identify our next generation. But there is no such thing as a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old member of any generation. If you happen to be one of those born on or near the cusp of the two generations, yep, you might find your own core values are a blend of the older and younger, gets a little gray at the edges. It takes about an hour to present a single generation in depth, and in our shorter time here today, your conference planners have asked me to very briefly introduce the four younger generations, hopefully at least in enough of a way that I can connect the dots and make you curious enough to then pursue the topic further on your own. Here, very briefly, is how this stuff works. The silent generation, a very small generation in both of our countries, because about half of their 19 birth years occurred during the 1930s, the Great Depression and its immediate aftermath, when the unemployment rate is extremely high for the entire decade, and it is often economically unwise to conceive another mouth to feed. And then also during the years of World War II, when with 1.1 million Canadians overseas fighting, it is sometimes rather logistically difficult to conceive another child. The formative years of this generation that will mold them for life are essentially the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and into the very early 60s. This is an era in both of our countries of extreme conformity. Don't rock the boat. Children should be seen and not heard. And it hits the silence first in their childhood and then in early adulthood. The white men of this generation enjoy a remarkably smooth career passage. They enter the workforce from the end of World War II to the early 60s, and that is precisely when much of the Western world, but especially Canada and the States, have economies that take off like a rocket ship. The post-war era of capital consumption. It is also an era when many females and minorities are largely and methodically denied many legitimate job and career opportunities. In fact, as former UN Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick once said, we are the generation of women born 20 years too soon. Too soon to catch two enormous waves that younger boomer women will catch. The invention of the birth control pill, which opens career doors for women, and the feminist movement itself, which kicks down those doors. The silent generation will come of age when the act of reading a hard copy publication is absolutely magical. In the 30s, 40s, and 50s, silent kids see usually their fathers ritualistically read every story of the daily newspaper sitting in the same chair at the same time, and that's when kids know you don't mess with dad. He's reading the newspaper. The newspaper must be something that is very important. Also, as silent kids come of age, they see their mothers eagerly awaiting those weekly magazines or those monthly magazines. And so they absorb their mother's enthusiasm for that medium. And they also have a similar passionate childhood experience with books. Television is not yet a 24/7 activity. And to this day, silents remain avid readers. This generation is financially better off, more physically and mentally fit, and younger thinking than any prior generation. They spend money freely on themselves because they feel they have earned the right to reward themselves because they were dutiful to their employers, they did not seriously rock the boat, and now it is their turn.